see now was provided by that owner, and he warned us that this thing, I believe that it's just a hermit or possibly somebody living in the woods, is allegedly out there. The owner, though, strangely thinks that whatever is out there is not a person, and hence he provided this image to us. The good news is that he doesn't think anyone is in the prison, though, because it's locked up and inaccessible. We inquired as to if he would allow us to bring firearms, and he said yes. And so that's why I'm here. What would you guys recommend? I own an AUG and thought that would probably be sufficient. I also have an AR-9, a 9mm, as well as a regular Glock. Whatever I bring will be fitted with a light, and I also have a headlamp, but yeah, what do you guys think? Should I bring more than that? And what do you guys think this actually is? This story is one that was experienced by a faithful friend of mine, Sam, and I. I'm often reluctant to tell this story at length, to most people at least, as the subject matter is, well, unexplainable and rather strange, I guess. I just don't want to be viewed as the superstitious nut. But having guided all across the country and having extensive experience in many environments around the United States, I feel that I have the authority to tell this story. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is that I've been around in the deep dark hollows all across North America and never experienced something so strange as I did that night. I don't fancify my experiences in the woods, nor do I hopefully imagine that there's something more to a twig breaking. As anyone who has spent a good deal of time in the woods knows, there's just no reason to. I mean, eventually you'll experience something daring or fantastic. It's just a matter of time. I am a hunter first and foremost, and to a hunter, there's always an explanation, a reason to the wilderness and her inhabitants. It's how we identify patterns and exploit an animal's rhythm to make successful hunts. As a hunter, you're a sort of woodsman detective, I suppose, piecing together clues to set yourself up for success. And let's just say that this tale is a bit of a cold case. So, it was early summer and I was itching to go camping. I had recently received a new tent and was eager to use it. I called up my good buddy Sam, and we planned out our camping adventure. We considered going up to the Grayson Highlands, or even south into North Carolina. After debating it, we decided that it would be more fun to camp somewhere that we wouldn't run into any other people. Deep in the woods, far from anyone else, where we could do some bushcraft, hoot and holler, and bring a gun without fear of scaring the yuppies camping next to us. Well, while we both lived in the woods, I definitely had access to the most remote stretch of woods between us. So, we loaded up our stuff and began hiking deep into the valley below my childhood home. The hike was almost completely straight down a steep hillside, deep into a hollow that held a small patch of flat land, a floodplain area, and a creek. The small creek that ran gave the area a beautiful ambience, though. Early signs of summer were visible all around us, and the weather was great. We hiked until we felt the need to start gathering firewood before nightfall. Behind us was a steep hillside that rose into the west for miles. In front of us was the creek, and to the left the start of another ridge and hillside that rose high into the east and the north. To our right, the valley that we were in continued to go down a cutting deep valley, and on the other side of the creek, another ridge, separated by a small stream from the ridge to the left. It rose into the west and to the south. These two ridges in front of us ran for miles, and the little valley formed by the small creek split these ridges for a long ways up until it hit the springhead. This is important for later in the story, which is why I'm giving all of these details. Now, off to the right further down the valley, more splits in the ridges are made by these little tributaries. We started building camp, by clearing the brush around and leaves away and constructing a small fire pit. I placed a tarp on the ground to separate my tent from the damp earth that night. Remember this too. The tarp expanded out roughly a foot on each side of my tent. Sam had a hammock that night that he planned to sleep in. I've only ever camped in a hammock once and it did not go great. But I didn't say anything to him, thinking that maybe he would enjoy it. We gathered a hefty load of firewood, consisting of some reasonably dry stuff. It was shaping up to be a really nice camping trip. I've spoken about the joy of being out there many times before, so I won't beat a dead horse, but it was really nice to be away from people. Sam and I sat around the fire and shot the breeze until the sun went down. Now, one of the things that Sam and I have always bonded on has been Bigfoot shows. We're both skeptics, and I would say that we hold a similar or the same opinion on the subject. Our interest is less about believing in Bigfoot, but rather we just find the subject matter to be sort of nostalgic, silly, and a fun thing to joke about. So I brought up the idea to Sam that we begin to hunt Bigfoot. He laughed and he thought that it was a great idea, so we began doing the antics that they do in the Finding Bigfoot TV show. We started with the classic tree knocks. A tree knock, for those unaware, is when you use a stick to beat on a tree, making a loud knocking sound that echoes throughout the forest. Supposedly, Sasquatch communicate this way. Obviously, we didn't think anything of it at all. As I said before, we didn't really believe in this. We were just joking around. So we began by knocking on the trees and then stopping and listening for a response. And after a few times of doing this, we paused, and hearing nothing, I began to think of a joke to crack and something else to do, really, but before I could open my mouth, we heard clear as day a tree knock, far off, somewhere on the ridge to the left. I looked at Sam and said, "Dude." Sam just looked back at me in surprise. I then did some more knocks and we listened again. Then, off in the distance, we heard more knocks in response. Then the other ridge to the right, we began hearing knocks. Sam at this point was beginning to get freaked out a little bit and was perplexed as to what it could be. I, at the time, was such a hard skeptic. I carried on and insisted that it was a person or maybe a woodpecker. But who in the world would be out here, deeper in the woods than we are, on private land? Plus, what woodpecker makes 3 loud booming knocks on the tree like that sound exactly like the knocks that we make? Sam said as he voiced his rebuttal. I ignored these arguments and held strong to the fact that there is no Bigfoot. I then insisted that we push the envelope a bit by doing some whoops and howls, just like they do on TV. Sam was not very enthused by this idea, being the humbler and smarter one of us that night, knowing that sometimes there's certain things that you just don't mess with. But at the time, I was full of beer and vinegar and stubborn as a mule about the fact that Bigfoot is not real. I'd also brought a gun with me and was certain that I could fight off anything that we would need to fight off that night. So we started howling into the woods. It was dark that night, being a new moon and all, and beyond the firelight, you couldn't see a thing. We would howl and wait listening for a reply, and after a few howls, the excitement of what was that started to fade, and my logical, rational, science-based theory of the woodpecker began to appear like it was true. But then, out of the dark distance, came one of the strangest sounds that I have ever heard. A howl, but not a canine howl, not an owl's hoot, but something more like an ape howl. Sam's eyes were as big as backhoe tires, and even I was finding it hard to reason that one. Despite this, I continued my ignorant stubbornness and threw out another howl. Off to the left of the ridge, it replied to us again, the clearest ape whoop that I had ever heard. I looked at Sam, myself feeling more curious and excited than anything else, and I reiterated, "Dude." Then, something truly unexplainable and spooky happened. More whoops and howls began on the ridge to the right and further down the valley, and they weren't random. They had etiquette, I guess, as if they were chatting back and forth with each other. The one to the left would howl, the one to the right would whoop and howl, the first would respond, and then the one way down in the valley would chime in too. Sam was really freaked out now and began considering if we should leave. I, being a stubborn idiot, claimed that it must be owls. Owls? We were both raised in these hollers, man. I've heard owls. You're going to tell me that that's an owl? Have you ever in your life heard an owl that sounded like an ape like that? Sam argued against my claim. Well, no, but Bigfoot's not real, dude. It has to be a bunch of owls speaking to each other. I mean, there's nothing else that it could be. I replied, half laughing in astonishment and disbelief of what was unfolding that night. Sam and I kind of bickered for a minute over it, and then decided that the wisest decision was to stop antagonizing whatever it was in the woods miles around us whooping and knocking, and to just leave it alone. It wasn't too long after that, we decided to go to bed too. I crawled into my tent and Sam into his hammock. We left the fire going that night, and every time the fire died down, the woods just seemed to come to life. Whether it was paranoia or paranormal, something was definitely stirring. All around camp we could hear what sounded like things being thrown and footsteps too. From time to time we would hear another knock or another howl coming from a new position. Sam would leap out of his hammock and chuck loads of wood into the fire and make it as big as possible. He would then lay back down to sleep cautiously. This repeated about 3 more times. Each time the fire died, things got spookier and spookier though. A few times Sam would say, "Did you hear that?" And every time I would just blame it on possums nearing camp, hoping to find food scraps. Well, about the 3rd time, Sam finally ran out of firewood, meaning that this time when the fire died, well, it died for good, leaving us in the dark void of the Appalachian Holler. I vividly remember too that I'd fallen asleep before the fire died, and after it died, there was so much stirring around camp that I actually woke up. I was slowly waking up, thinking that I was having some sort of a nightmare when I finally fully sobered and realized that my dream was pleasant. It was reality that was full of frightening sounds and things that go bump in the night all of a sudden. The woods around us had become loud with unexplainable movement, the movement of something large and multiples. The whooping and the knocking, that had officially stopped at this stage, which quite honestly did not comfort me at all. With all the new sounds right outside of my door now, there was maybe a 30-yard perimeter around camp that the sounds didn't cross. Then, suddenly, an extremely loud crashing began through the twigs, leaves, and the branches. Whatever it was something large, running full sprint through the woods, starting maybe 50 yards away, and running straight towards our camp. It grew louder and louder until the sound of crushing leaves suddenly turned to the crinkling of tarp. Whatever or whoever was out there was standing on the tarp that my tent was situated on. I was frozen in fear, eyes wide open now. My heart was pounding out of my chest so hard that I thought it was about to explode. I then heard high above my tent, not near the ground, not 4 feet up, but high above my tent, the most terrifying sound that I had ever heard. It was the sound of a huff and a blow, exactly the way that you hear a gorilla do it on TV, or how apes in the Planet of the Apes do it. 3 forceful huffs and blows. Then, whatever it was, turned around and ran back the way that it came, back into the darkness of the night. Well, Sam practically leapt out of his hammock and said, "You have to have heard that." I replied with, "I sure did. Yeah, let's get out of here, man." I slid around into the chamber and I crawled out of the tent. We both got busy grabbing only our essentials and started out of the woods. Using terrible dim flashlights, we made our way up the hill, frantically looking behind us into the terrible night and trying to move fast without running. We hiked a long ways, and by the time that we had made it back to the house, it was way past midnight. We never did see what it was that charged us that night, and we never did hear anything else after that as well. But whatever it was, it scared us enough to make us hike out into the dead of night and just leave all of our gear out there for another day. We returned the next morning in full daylight to gather our things. Looking back, I wish that we had surveyed the area for tracks or some sort of a clue as to what it may have been, but at the time we just didn't want to be down there for any longer than we had to. Having been some years since this happened, I would go down there now in a heartbeat and not think anything of it. I mean, when I come home these days, I usually feel a sense of ease in the woods. It feels like a weight is lifted off of our shoulders, knowing that there are no cougars or grizzly bears to worry about here, really. For my western outdoors folk, familiar with cougar country that is, hearing this I don't feel a weight in the woods probably doesn't ring true for you, but my reply would be the question, have you ever noticed that you've been stalked before? Cougars are some of the sneakiest creatures in the animal kingdom, and just because you've never noticed doesn't mean that it hasn't happened. I myself have been stalked. I've written about it elsewhere previously, and it's a feeling that will stick with you and definitely put you on edge in cougar country for a long time afterward. I actually have a colleague who guides western big game in New Mexico who told me a story once that during a hunt, he had a fellow guide spotting for him, and that guide watched a cougar stalk my friend through a grove of trees before giving up. And my friend never even had the slightest idea that he was being stalked. I believe for an avid outdoorsman in cougar country, it's inevitable, and so you just sort of have to get used to it. And as far as grizzly country, it's a similar feeling but a little bit different. Most ill bear encounters happen because you surprise the bear in the thick of the woods. I have many friends from my time in Alaska who would share stories of being charged by monster grizzlies from just out of nowhere. Like, they're just hiking along and then 800 pounds of death is blasting straight towards them all of a sudden. And the consensus is the same amongst them. If you spend enough time out there, it's going to happen eventually. I, luckily, was never charged during my time in Alaska. I avoided known bear hangouts, but the few times that I spent time in bear country, I always had this sort of jack-in-the-box anxiety, just waiting for it to happen. What's funny though is that, despite that weight being lifted initially, an old feeling always returns. I know that it's not some sort of psychological thing having to do with that patch of the woods specifically, because I feel it in most places in Appalachia. It's a feeling of being watched, a feeling that something is there, and a feeling of dread. And it amplifies every time you hear some strange crashing in the woods or a sound that you just cannot explain. Most of the times I've experienced this, I've had a gun with me, thankfully, and I think to myself, come on man, you're the worst thing out here, what's there to worry about? And yet, I can just never shake that anxiety. My brother, though, without even having heard this story, reluctantly asked me over the phone one day, "Don't think that I'm crazy, but have you ever felt creeped out in the woods below the house? I don't know what it is, but every time that I go down there, I feel like I'm being watched and I get filled with dread." Hearing him say that genuinely sent shivers down my spine, simply because I always dismiss this feeling. I mean, I've swept this story under the rug for years, telling myself that it must have just been a bear encounter or something. But to hear my brother, who is a Marine, tell me that, certified to me that I was not simply being a coward. I've only ever felt this in two regions of the country as well, Appalachia and the redwood forests of Northern California. Now, some of you may be listening to this thinking that I'm just a nutjob Bigfoot believer. I've been reluctant to share this story for that reason, in fact. But I want to end this by saying that, genuinely, I have no idea what it was that made those calls that night. I also have no idea what it was that busted into our camp. I mean, I never did lay eyes on anything, and I just don't know what it was. But I want to reiterate that the story, it's true. It's verbatim to how it happened, or as best as I can recall it anyway, without any embellishment. I have no idea what it was, and you can make your own decision as to what you think it might be. But being an experienced woodsman, never, ever have I experienced anything like that since. And every single explanation that I've ever come up with just really doesn't add up. Those were the events that transpired that night, and I guess I'll let all of you guys make of it what you will. To preface this, I'm currently 19 going on 20, and due to a vindictive teacher, she manipulated the grade so that I would have to repeat the 3rd grade because I called another student a brat for crying about wanting her mum. But the context behind is irrelevant, and the rundown is that the girl thought because her mum was a teacher, she could cry her way into her mum's class. Her mum was a high school teacher and would almost always cry and cry until she was allowed to go, and then she would be distraught having to leave her class and pick her daughter up because she wanted attention. I ended up snapping and telling this girl that she's in the 3rd grade and is too old to be crying for her mum and disrupting other students leaving. It was probably a bit harsh, but you could tell this girl was very spoiled. Now, in August of 2023, I was in my junior year. I went to a trade school for graphic design, and a sophomore named James had taken notice that I wouldn't be dropped off at our home school like he was. He offered to drive me home, and I didn't know this kid very well. I spoke to him a few times, but other than that, I wasn't buddy-buddy with him or anything. So I told him that my mum prefers to meet people before just letting me ride in a random person's car like this, especially a guy's car. And I told him that with me being 18 at the time, that if he got into a wreck, I would be responsible as the adult in the car. After that, he didn't really bother me anymore with anything. We still talked and could tell that he wasn't neurotypical, I guess you could say. It wasn't until my senior year that things definitely got creepy. We exchanged numbers because I would sometimes help him with homework that he didn't fully understand, and give recommendations of horror channels on YouTube such as Reddit stories, creepypasta readings, or channels that cover disturbing videos. And within about a month, he actually found my home address. Mind you, I never told him where I lived, and he got dropped off way earlier than me. The way that the homeschool worked was that all students on the west side would go to the singular middle school and high school, while students from the east side, they would go to another high school. I never told this kid where I lived, let alone a rough area. But it was at about this point that I started documenting everything, no matter how big or small. The next following months, if I would fall asleep on the bus, he would always tap my headphones, snap them on my ears, kick my legs, shake me, or call my phone just so that I would talk to him. In April, he asked me to go to prom with him, and I tried to tell him multiple times that I just wasn't interested. And he tried to manipulate me, to which I just lied to him and told him that I had a family event that day anyway. After that, I said something to the principal of him harassing and sort of shaming people to go to prom with him, and he gave the most insincere apology ever. He worded it like he was forced to apologize. I get a phone call the next day of him asking if my sister drove a red car and worked at a coffee house. I quickly told him no and blocked his number. It was now that I went to administration, coupled with the fact that this kid would call to ask if I went to the Dollar General, or went to work, or if I was home, and told me thoughts that he had about killing his mum's boyfriend, how he wants to smash his teeth in, smacking his phone against the window, and tried to manipulate me into calling him while he was having a panic attack, and ranted about how my math teacher needed to be gutted because she was overweight and that fat women are ugly and horrible vessels for producing babies. She's not overweight from poor diet, mind you. She actually is one of those rare people that has a medical condition that's caused a buildup of estrogen. Well, the worst was when he lashed out in anger about him losing his AirPod case and aggressively stomping on his AirPods and literally foaming at the mouth. I went to the principal and liaison after this, only to be unable to talk, and they yelled at me for an hour about how I was being mean to a kid on the spectrum, and that my information, my mother's information, and my sister's information is public information apparently. I started having a panic attack and called my mother. At this point, I was literally vomiting in the trash can of the conference room, and my mother was absolutely furious. My mum told me to call the sheriff's office after I get home. The sheriff actually went to the kid's house and told him to knock this stuff off, or I had every right to file stalking and harassment charges. The 180 Women's Shelter confirmed that what the principal and the liaison did was disgusting and actually dangerous. And well, so far I haven't seen him, and I still have his number blocked, and hopefully I don't see him anymore. When I was in my early 20s, I drove down to Tucson, Arizona from Colorado to spend the weekend with my best friend and his girlfriend. Him and I had one of those nights set aside for him and I to camp in the desert for the night, something that we had both done countless times already throughout our lives, so we were pretty excited about it. The region we planned on camping in was due south of Tucson, but still well north of the US-Mexican border. Now, cut ahead to us arriving at the site in broad daylight, having a great time enjoying the areas and views and all that. We had set up camp for the night and sit out in foldable chairs, watching the amazing stars overhead before we eventually pass out. The road that we were parked off of had two directions, and was a narrow dirt road, either from Tucson towards Mexico or vice versa. So, as we sit peacefully, a large vehicle with insanely bright blue headlights rounds the corner coming from the south. Even from hundreds of feet away, they absolutely blinded us with those headlights. And instead of continuing down the road, they seemed to have noticed our tents and pulled off towards us. As they got closer, we could tell that this wasn't a Border Patrol truck. It was a very nice all-black Escalade with tinted windows that you could barely see through. The front two doors opened and two Hispanic men in flashy nice clothing got out and walked up to us. The headlights still on and blasting us with light from up close, casting an ominous silhouette on the two men as the light shined from behind them. They asked us, "Which way to Tucson?" We're speechless for a second, but I tell them that it's down the road in the way that they were headed. They stared at me hard in the eyes for several moments until I was probably visibly rattled. I was fully convinced at the time that we were about to be executed or worse right then and there. But weirdly, they both laughed heavily and said, "Have a good night, white boys," and drove off towards Tucson. We didn't sleep very well that night. Now, I know that it may just seem like another simple conversation, but that shook us pretty hard, so we both said nothing of it the next morning and for years afterward as well. But I brought it up to him last year and reflected on it, and we both agreed that they were probably cartel and were just trying to strike fear into us. And well, they definitely succeeded. And because of those headlights, for the life of me, I really could not even remember what their faces looked like, even standing right in front of me like that. Honestly though, I'm kind of glad that I don't. Moral of the story is that there are some parts of the desert that you just don't go. This happened about 4 years ago in a small town in WA. My girlfriend, now ex, not that it really matters for the story, at the time, and I decided to plan a getaway trip for a long weekend in a yurt since we both love nature and going to a place far from the city in the middle of nowhere, well, it seemed like a good time to us. And it really was a great time too. The thing that struck me most about staying in that yurt, though, was just how dark and quiet it was at nighttime in the middle of the night. When you're not used to the wilderness like this, it's pretty striking how silent things can be and just how dark the outside is when there's no light pollution involved. The outhouse where we had to go to the bathroom for was also about 75 yards away from the yurt, and you had to take a flashlight with you in order to navigate the darkness. The first night that we were there as well, nature called and I went outside to find the bathroom. I shined the flashlight that cut through the darkness like a lightsaber around and spotted eyeshine. It was nothing more than a good-sized female deer, but I would have had no idea that she was there if I didn't see the eyes via the flashlight. The actual encounter, though, happened our last night there at maybe around 11 p.m. at night. We were playing cards inside the yurt by the fire when, out of nowhere, we heard this huge crash or bang on the side of the yurt, almost as if something threw itself on the side of it, or was running and didn't see it there until it was too late kind of thing. Obviously startled, we wanted to see what made such a sound. But we were in the middle of nowhere, obviously, but we were still on a property and not very deep into the woods for it to have been a bear or a mountain lion. At least, I thought so. What happens next, though, is, well, pretty hard to explain, but I threw the door open and shined my flashlight like I did the night prior when I saw the deer. And I saw something in the same spot, but it was different. It had no eyeshine, and I only saw it for a moment, but it looked like it was white or grey, and it had a slender build to it. What creeped me out was the way that it moved, though. It seemed to sort of crouch down while looking in my direction, slinking away out of frame like a big cat or a monkey might move out of the way. And then I never saw anything after that. Obviously, I did not want to investigate because I was terrified that it might have been a cougar or something to that effect, and I'm not trying to die in front of my girlfriend, even if she left me not long after this, but that aside, whatever I saw was unlike anything I had ever seen. Also, I never really made out a face, which was weird. I read on a post on this sub somewhere earlier today that someone had a Bigfoot encounter of it crawling across the ground, and for whatever reason it made me remember this encounter, and honestly it sort of sent shivers down my spine. I'm not saying that it was Bigfoot. Heck, it could have been something normal. I mean, I did only see it for maybe a few seconds at most, but I've just never really seen anything move like that in real life, or even in a movie or a TV show or anywhere. It was strange and, well, I'm sorry for rambling, but I guess I'm wondering if anyone has had a similar encounter, or at least has an explanation for what the heck I could have seen that night. So if anyone watches Ghost Hunters, well, you can look up the episode called The Chinatown Poltergeist, and it's an episode inside of the bar that I worked at for half a year. On my first day to interview, the general manager and the bar manager were very clear with me that the bar, it definitely was haunted. They were really serious about it too, and that it was more mischievous than it was dangerous. Having had my own paranormal experiences in college, and having somewhat of a higher vibration, I wasn't too worried about it, and I really wanted or needed the job. A fun fact too is that Vinnie Paul Abbott of Pantera was actually there the night before he died. Anyway, a lot of my co-workers had different stories, along with the stories that are featured in the Ghost Adventures episode too. Entities mentioned were an old man and a little girl. There really is something with little girls and haunted places. But they also mentioned having things break or go missing, voices in storage areas, voices when the bar was empty during grave hours. It's a 24-hour bar. And even physical things like hair being pulled or one guy being thrown to the ground after mocking an artifact of a shrunken head that may or may not have been a real shrunken head. Not too sure about that. In any case, I was also shown a ceremonial blade that allegedly still has real human blood on it, and an urn that apparently has a fraction of the ashes of Aleister Crowley. For a while, I never really saw or heard anything, and I was left by myself alone in the bar a few times. I did put music on and just kind of sing like, maybe there's a spirit here and I'll give them a show. But I started to, change is the best way that I can describe it, really. I was always angry and frustrated. I would rationalize all these things that I should be happy and grateful for, but I just couldn't help it. I was always just really angry, and on a 120-degree day in Vegas, when a belligerent customer started harassing me, I told her to shut up, and as liberating as that was, because she really was a bit of an evil person, it was out of my character for a professional bartender of 13 years to do this. Then I started getting these weird rashes and marks all over my body, but I thought that I was getting really sick and got it in my head that I'd developed something really bad, but turns out it was just a rash of some sort. That led me to more stress though, lots of restless days, and eventually my herniated disc started acting up randomly and got to such a level of pain that I was having to scoop ice while on my knees. The pain in my back affected my performance so much that I actually ended up losing the job. And from there, I spiraled into 3 or 4 months of panic attacks and levels of anxiety that I never even thought that I was capable of experiencing. As a spiritual person that's still learning about God, I just called on that and I prayed for my strength. Eventually, I was able to push through, avoid medication, and worked my way out of the depression as well. But I just haven't been able to shake the effect that place had on me, and I was even warned about it too. I've never seen such a high turnover in a place, and there's very few of the staff that have stuck around for various reasons. One of the last messages from my bar manager was wishing me good luck and also an admission as to how weird the energy is there. It could have all just been coincidental and a nervous breakdown, I admit, but intuitively, I just really don't think so. So I recently had something particularly weird happen to me that's left me pretty icked out, and I'm curious if anyone here has ever had an experience or something similar to this, or has any thoughts on what they think that this could have been. So, a bit of context. My girlfriend and I will do this weird, high-pitched tongue trilling kind of noise back and forth when we're feeling goofy. It's a very specific noise though, and there's no real reason to make it, nor have we ever heard anyone else or anything else make it. It's a very particular noise. And well, a couple of nights ago, she and I were having a silly, goofy sort of little evening, and we had each had a gummy of a particular variety, if you catch my drift, listened to some music and watched some movies in the living room. We most definitely ended up making that sound a couple of times, and by midnight we had migrated into the bedroom and we fell asleep pretty much right away. Well, I wake up at around 3:30 in the morning to the exact sound that I explained earlier, seemingly coming from our living room though. At first, I figured that it must have just been a nightmare, but then I look over and my girlfriend is sitting bolt upright too. We sort of look at each other for a second, and then she just starts calling out for our cat, apparently thinking that it might have been her meowing or something, but said cat ended up being asleep right next to the bed. This freaked me out pretty bad, and I quickly got up and cleared the apartment to make sure that there wasn't another person inside with us, but I can assure you that there wasn't. I've tried to explain this mundanely, but I'm having a really hard time believing any of my explanations. We live in an old, very solid apartment building and only have 2 connecting neighbors. The walls between us are very thick and we typically only hear the upstairs neighbors on occasion, and even then, rarely their voices. I mean, the exterior walls here are so thick that it can easily start thunderstorming and you won't even hear it. The noises that we heard, though, weren't even particularly loud or anything, but it was very, very clear, not muffled as if through a wall or anything like that. Any theories I've had about nightmares or residual effects from the aforementioned gummy have been neutralized by the fact that we both heard it and both woke up, especially since she's a pretty heavy sleeper as well. So, any thoughts or experiences would be very much appreciated right now. We don't feel unsafe or anything, but we definitely feel particularly creeped out by this. We're both pretty spiritually active people and have had some experiences that we've been unable to explain, but neither of us have ever had something like this happen before. So I'm a military brat and we move a lot. When I was 10 years old, we moved to a new house. The house was just built at least 2 years before we moved in, so we didn't think too much of it. Honestly, the place looked pretty nice and modern. I got the room that was kind of furthest away from all the other rooms, but I thought that this was a score since it had its own bathroom and I could be as loud as I wanted to. No one could really hear me. The first year living in that house was pretty good as well, until I was in the 6th grade. In the 6th grade, I got bullied pretty badly since I was a new kid and didn't really have much good friends. It went on until the end of the school year as well. Now, that summer I started seeing things inside of my closet. It's like I would leave the house to go out and I would close my closet door, but when I'd come back it would always be open. I was too lazy to shut it again, so then later that night I'd turn towards it, and I swear that I could see a face in my closet. It was a shadowy figure just sort of looking at me. I told my parents about this and they told me that it was probably one of my stuffed animals. So after that, I just tried to ignore it. Until one night, I was just watching some TV and I saw in the corner of my eyes stuff moving in my room. I had this lamp in the corner of my desk and somehow it was just sort of turned around. Next to that, 3 of my drawers were opened, and so I thought to myself, that's strange. The next day, I told my mum about it, and after that, well, it all just went to hell. So I told my mum about it, and she let me sleep in her room since I was young and scared. The next morning, we went into my room, and it just felt cold and empty, like all the light had been sucked out of there. I come from a Catholic family too, and when stuff like this happens, we call a priest immediately. So we called a priest, and he said that he'll come down within 3 to 5 days. And those 3 to 5 days were absolutely crazy. Like at night, we'd hear scratches on the wall, doorknobs moving, screaming coming from the hallway leading to my room, the light turning off and on. Once, the television even turned off and on. The day that the priest got there, we did an exorcism for the house, and he basically put some salt, holy water, and oil into a bowl and started praying. But when he did this, it felt like the whole place was just sort of like shaking almost, vibrating. We thought that all of our problems were just solved, but it only got worse from there. After that, the priest got very sick and the house just kept feeling even more dark. My dad, he isn't really a believer in this sort of stuff. He thought that we were all just sort of BSing him and that it was all just a bit of a sick joke that we made up. His and my mum's marriage was already falling apart and they'd fight every day since we moved into that place. So they got into a fight over this, and my mum told him that she hopes whatever entity is in the house gets to him. And right after she said that, he swears that he was possessed by something. This thing in my house went into his body apparently, and his whole face started leaking snot. What I mean is it came out of his ears, his eyes and nose, and his eyes were just not his. It was like looking into the eyes of a different person almost. Eventually he fell to the floor and came to, but that was obviously very, very scary. After that happened, he knew that we needed to get out of there as well. So he applied for housing on the military base, and we just waited and prayed that whatever was in our house would go away. From time to time, I would see shadows of people. It's like I would be sitting at the dining table, and in the corner of my eyes, I would see the body of a man, but it was just black shadow, completely black. And usually he had a hat on as well. Sometimes I would see a lady just standing in the hallway looking at us. Eventually, a priest that did training at the Vatican got hold of us and came over to bless the house. Weirdly too, without even coming inside the house, he knew that something evil was with us. After talking to all of us, he let us know that our house was definitely haunted and we needed to get out before anything worse happened. He said, though, that whatever this demon was, they apparently wanted to get me since I was so vulnerable and young. After he had left, I started to experience out-of-body events as well. I would have these dreams where it was like I was just sort of floating above my body and I just wasn't there sort of thing. I started to hear voices in my head that weren't people around me or anything, and I also started having evil thoughts of harming other people. When I told my mother about this, she started sending me out of the house to play with other kids so that I wouldn't be exposed to the place. One of the weirdest things that happened at that house was that we were all out for the day and the mailman came to deliver a package, and after speaking to the mailman eventually, we found out that an old woman allegedly opened the door. Obviously, though, there was no old woman living in our house at the time. So when we came home and the package wasn't there, we obviously called the mail office and they told us that an old woman answered the door and told them that we didn't live there anymore, like we were just gone. After that too, my dad called almost every day to see how much longer until we could live on base. We had locked up my old room and put a line of salt outside the door at this stage. We had also covered each mirror as it could allegedly be a portal to the other side. The scratches continued until we moved out. So did all of the shadow people, the voices, and all of the weird touches and feelings that we get. After all summer of this happening, we were finally able to move on base. And when we did, everything just stopped. I still had a couple of dreams in our new house, but nothing like that experience ever again. Dayton, Ohio, between the years of 1997 and 2007, and also 2020. I was 8 when we moved into this old country house on 89 acres of land, and I lived there for about 10 years. Previously, we lived in a ranch-style home in a neighborhood. I've returned several times, never alone, because it's my home, but also never alone because, well, that's just dumb. Allow me to explain. When we first moved in, my brother and sister would notice red eyes peering through windows. Not low either, but quite high up, always looking down. This happened weekly as well, almost nightly, those eyes. We developed a fear of windows because of this, but nevertheless we tried to make what we could out of living there. I mean, something was just looking into the house and we really didn't know what it was. And to be honest, we hadn't experienced anything else, so eventually we ventured into the woods to try and figure out what it was. We played in the creeks, but would never go out at night. Time moved on, Mum and Dad divorced, and we left briefly, only to return back with my dad and his new wife. I was the only child living in the house. My siblings lived with my mum and my step-siblings with their dad. It wouldn't be long as well, and I would hear weird things in that house. footsteps walking across upstairs, coming down the stairs, opening the door, and no one there. My dad, an absolute twit, didn't care for curtains, so I eventually put up blankets on all of my bedroom windows. I always, and I mean always, felt like I was being watched. I was also lucky enough to have a deadbolt on my bedroom door, which I utilized every single night. Now, I never put too much thought into it, but all the doors did, and even the front door had 6 locks on it. All of them had locks. I never thought them any good because, the door was mostly glass window anyway. And those locks really wouldn't stop much, but still, why were they there and why were there so many? Bear with me here because I'm getting to the juicy bit soon. So one Saturday night, it's just me and my brother and stepbrother. We're watching some recap of WWE and I'm playing Freecell on the computer in the dining room next to an open window. I know, open window, right? You just said windows were bad. It was summer and I was 15 and we lacked AC and I felt comfortable and safe with my brother there. Anyway, whistling. I hear whistling outside. It's midnight, so who the heck is outside whistling? It must be my dad, I thought. No, Dad would have to walk past me to get out, and he'd be irritated that we were still up this late. So, who is whistling? Whoever it is, the whistling's getting closer, walking the sidewalk around the house. I hear this, and so I quickly get my brothers. They do the same thing. They think it's Dad, which I quickly debunk. We're all pretty terrified at this stage. I hurry us to my room so that we could see what it might be. When it nears our side of the house, and I look my door, we stand there quietly. The front door opens and the whistling stops. Now there's footsteps. I'm begging please to go upstairs to my brother. Whoever this is, we are definitely better off upstairs because Dad is upstairs in bed. The footsteps start coming to my room though. My brothers and I instantly look at each other in fear. Their eyes began to well up and my stepbrother started to cry quietly. The footsteps step in front of our door, and then silence. I eventually work up enough courage to try and peek through the keyhole. I cannot see a thing though. I can sort of see into the hall, but whatever is on the other side, it's out of view. So I get on my belly to look under the door, and that was when I see shoes. I don't remember shoes being there when we came in, but I also don't remember paying attention to that detail, so I'm not sure if these are shoes from somebody standing there or if they've just been left there by one of us. So I whisper to my brothers, "Where are your shoes?" One points across my room, the other to his feet. I wore boots exclusively, so they definitely weren't mine. So that means that there must be an intruder, and that they're right outside of my door now. I'm not going out without a fight, so I conjure a quick plan, one that involved my swords, yes, swords, and me going out of the door first in a charge. We count to 3 and my brother swings the door open, I charge, and that's when we realize that there's nothing there. No one. There were no footsteps that indicated they left. The front door was closed and didn't seem to have been opened, indicating that anybody had left. So, what gives? I checked the other rooms, only to be confronted by my dad in his boxes cussing me out for being up this late and being so loud. We tried to explain, but he just wouldn't listen. Also, the shoes that I saw under the door were nowhere to be found. Well, a year later, my brother, 2 cousins, and myself venture into the property next to mine, seeking adventure, being the age that we were. Well, we got lost at some stage, and from what I could tell from climbing trees, we were just really far from home. But I knew a road that was nearby, so before the sun set we needed to make it to that road, then we should have been in the clear. while I was up in a tree, I noticed these beautiful evergreens. I'd never seen anything like it on my property before as well. I was sort of captivated by them, in fact. So I proposed a vote to the others that we keep heading towards the road, or that we head towards those sweet evergreens first. My brother insisted the road. He was overweight and done with walking any more than he had to. My cousin and I said evergreens though, and told the other cousin that his vote doesn't count. So evergreens we go. Now, upon reaching the location, we noticed a massive elevation in the middle of these woods. We climbed, and boy oh boy, hickory trees, massive ones. There was also this dead one that we could walk in, and it was like a little house almost. It was huge. My cousins and I decided to knock it over at one stage, and we eventually did. But while we were, my brother began to freak out. "We need to go. We need to leave," he insisted with purpose. I was like, okay, I know it's getting closer to sunset, but we're knocking this stuff over and it's fun. He was not having it though. He was ever more insistent, and so we left the area to calm the baby down, as I put it. Eventually we entered a field, and I looked at both ends and was like, one of you go check that tree, and one of you go and check the tree line over there, and tell me what you see. My brother then flips and just screams no. Fine, I'll go and check it, and Tom will go and check the other end. Once more my brother screams no, argues this weird point about not splitting up. So we as a group went one direction, and finally I recognized this place, which meant that home was now in sight. Still far off, but we were definitely back on land at this stage, and so we could make our way there. Once the house was visible, my brother just suddenly took off running though. And I mean, he doesn't run. He's heavy, he loathed walking, let alone running. But he ran all the way home as soon as he could see it. Obviously, I thought that was a bit weird. My cousin didn't speak a word, and my mum showed up and took him home. My dad and I were pretty confused. I mean, he never said that he was leaving early, but now he was just gone, went home. I figured that I must have walked him to death or something, and he was sick of it. Well, 30 minutes go by, and suddenly he calls. He says, "Joey, now I can tell you, I saw something. I don't know what it was, but it was tall, taller than Tom, faster than you, and it was watching us. You guys were knocking over the tree, and it kept running circles around us. I don't know if it noticed me watching it, but it was definitely watching us." So I asked, "And you didn't say anything because?" And she was sleeping on the couch and said that she woke up to scratching noises. I was pretty irritated that she had woken me up like this, but then also couldn't believe why she had woken me up, because she said, "Joey, the devil is at the front door. I heard scratching. I sat up and there it stood, these crazy eyes looking at me. Teeth, so many teeth. It's big, real big and hairy, and I'm scared." I asked what I was supposed to do, and she insisted that I go outside and make sure that it was gone. And I mean, to heck with that, I ain't dying. I have two people telling me that there's this thing, and neither people talk to each other, so how could they collaborate? Everything is pointing towards this being real at this stage, and it's literally at my front door. Eventually, I peek into the living room. I've obviously never seen this thing, but now I may get to. But alas, nothing was there. Actually, my dog was instead, and he was begging to be let in. He was a strictly outside dog and never was allowed in or wanted to be in, really. And I mean, I wasn't about to open the door, so I'd figured that he'd just keep us safe in some capacity being there, either by alerting us or being food for whatever was out there. Eventually, Tom and I decided to try and hunt this thing as well. We took my younger cousin as bait even, but we didn't have any luck. We eventually found the place where my brother claimed to have first seen this thing, but we were lost again. And the weirdest thing was that you would wander and wander, and suddenly you'd just sort of be there, with no real direction. What I mean is that it sort of wasn't like you could find it if you wanted to. You just sort of had to stumble upon it. Well, one day before leaving, having not seen a monster, I took a piece of yellow rope and tied 2 trees together. Nothing significant by any means. I was just a bored kid and thought that they'd grow together and it would be cool. Another month drifts by and my uncle stops by to go and do some tracking at one stage. It wasn't long though before he was back at the house screaming at me about being a terrible person. I'm confused and ask what he's going on about, and he said that just down the main trail that there's a dead dog. I really didn't see what the big deal was, so I went to check it out. And sure enough, there's this dog, but it's headless, footless. I stared at it for ages because I knew this rope. It was from my house and it was the one that I had used on those trees. My stomach sank. But one bird that I noticed, I thought to myself that I could try and catch this bird, so I had friends. I wanted everyone to know and see where I grew up, and while we were there, we separated briefly, boys with boys and girls with girls. My wife eventually came to me and said, "Why do you keep calling for me?" My friend then said, "Yeah, is everything okay?" I replied with a smile and said, "Yeah, I heard you guys too, but we weren't calling." I looked to her friend's husband. He was like, "Yeah, I heard you too, but we weren't calling for you, but we thought that you were calling for us." At this point, it was obvious that something weird was going on. I said that we needed to leave now, like right now, and not to look back, because we weren't calling or yelling for you guys, and my guess is that they weren't calling for us either. I wanted to show where I grew up and how spooky it was, and it definitely didn't disappoint. Leaving though, my wife looked back at one stage, and she swore that she saw a large white figure, and I was like, "Yeah, I've seen it since I was 10, and it's just something that you live without here." That was the last time that I went back there, and I certainly don't plan to go back ever again. I wanted to share an experience that happened to me years ago, and to this day remains totally unique in my life. I have never experienced anything like it before or afterward, and I genuinely still wonder what really happened. So, I rarely take naps, but that day, in the middle of the afternoon, I decided to lie down and rest a little bit. Nothing unusual, I fell asleep pretty normally, without any strange sensations or particular stress or anything. The dream, or whatever it was though, was strange. In my dream, I was lying down, and above me a dark figure was standing there. It had no distinct features, just a human-like shadow, motionless yet threatening. But it wasn't just an eerie presence, it was actively trying to take something from me. I physically felt a force attempting to pull something out of me. My energy, my soul, my consciousness. Impossible to say, but the sensation was undeniably real. It wasn't just a scary nightmare is what I'm getting at. It was something tangible, visceral, far beyond simple dream-induced fear. My instinct, though, was fight back. I didn't hesitate. I fought back immediately. It was a pure reflex, instinctive and primal. I put all of my willpower, all of my mental strength that was being taken from me. It felt like I was summoning every ounce of strength that I had and unleashing it into a single effort to take back what was mine. I really cannot explain how, but it felt like a real battle. Not a physical fight, not even a lucid dream struggle, but a raw, instinctual survival response in a dimension beyond the ordinary world. And thankfully, I won. Waking up and what came afterward, I was not in a panic, not with a jolt or anything, but just sort of awake. But my state was completely off. I was utterly drained all of a sudden, both physically and mentally. A crushing fatigue weighed on me, as if I had actually fought something. This wasn't just a lingering sense of fear from a bad dream. I was shaken, exhausted, as if I had been completely emptied of energy. It took me a good hour of walking outside, breathing some fresh air, just to feel somewhat normal again. It was a one-time event, no follow-up and no explanation. What unsettles me the most, though, isn't just the intensity of the experience, it's how completely isolated it was. What I mean is that I've never experienced anything remotely similar before or afterward. I don't suffer from sleep paralysis, and my dreams are usually pretty uneventful. Nothing in my life changed after this event, just this one confrontation with something unexplainable, and that's it. So, is it a hallucination, or was it a real supernatural experience? The most rational explanation would be a hypnagogic hallucination, sleep paralysis, or some subconscious phenomenon or something like that. But then, why only this one time? Why the real sensation of a struggle and the distinct feeling that I had won something back? Why the complete exhaustion afterwards? Deep down, I like to believe that on that day, I pushed something away, that by sheer willpower I defeated a presence that was trying to take a piece of me, and that whatever it was, after encountering my resistance, eventually gave up. Maybe it was just a dream. It's certainly possible. Or maybe, that day, I really faced something invisible. I never believed at all in anything until I had my own experience at an old hotel in New Orleans. At the time, it was called the Ambassador Hotel, and here's what happened. About 15 years ago, I was in New Orleans for work for a total of 4 nights. I chose this hotel because it was near the convention center where I needed to be, and it was in my company's price range as well. It was described as a boutique hotel. I later found out that it used to be an old warehouse that was renovated. So my room had the original wooden beams and all of that stuff. Anyway, when I first entered the room, the TV was on and the doors of the armoire where the TV was held were wide open. I found that a bit odd because in order to walk to the bathroom, you would have to have closed those doors because the armoire was at the foot of the bed. Anyway, I turned off the TV and closed the doors and started doing a little work at the desk. And suddenly, my room became just ice cold. I went over to the thermostat, and it's one of those old-fashioned ones where you slide to the left for cold and the middle position is off and to the right was heat. The thermostat? It was slid all the way to the left on cold, so I adjusted it to heat and then left the room to go to the convention center for a few hours. When I came back, the room was once again ice cold and the TV was on. When I checked the thermostat, it had been slid back all the way to cold. This freaked me out a bit because somebody obviously had to be in there, but my mind did not go to ghosts yet. I checked the whole room and nobody was in there. The door was locked correctly, so I just tried to put it out of my head. That night in the middle of the night, though, the TV went on while I was still sleeping. It was really starting to annoy me as well, and over the next 3 days I was gone at the convention center, but upon returning I continued to have the experience of the room going cold and the TV being on in my presence. And I mean, there simply was no explanation on how the thermostat could slide to the far left like that while I was in the room. So, on my last evening there, I was really freaking out, but I had a very early morning flight, so I needed to be awake at around 4 in the morning anyway. And around midnight, my TV went on, and I did something that you should probably never do. I said out loud, "All right, ghost, if you're really in here and you want to mess with me, then mess with me." At that moment, my bed immediately started shaking. Not a little bit, It was literally violently shaking. I instantly jumped out of bed and called downstairs explaining what was happening, and the person at the desk jokingly said, "You must be in the haunted room." I told him that I was serious and, "Is anyone else reporting anything like this?" And he said that a guest reported the same experience a couple of weeks prior, but he didn't know if that was the same room or not. He kind of calmed me down a bit and offered to switch me to a new room, but I didn't want to pack up all of my belongings just for 4 hours of sleep. Plus, I thought that I was going crazy, to be honest, and maybe hallucinating or something. As we ended our phone call, the bed stopped shaking and the room was suddenly quiet. I laid back down under the covers, pulled tight up to my neck, and laid there very quietly. And that was when something grabbed the blankets at the foot of my bed, where my feet were, and yanked 3 times really hard. Obviously, I sat up and I looked around the room, but I could confirm that there was no one there. And thankfully, that was the last thing that happened. So, about 2 years later, I needed to go back to the same convention center and thought that I had to have been going crazy or that there was a reasonable explanation for what may have happened, and I booked the same hotel and I had no experiences. When I checked out on my last day, though, I asked the gentleman at the front desk if I could ask him a strange question. So I asked him if he thought the hotel could be haunted, and he laughed and said, "I don't think that it could be, I know it is." He then asked if I had a ghost experience, so I told him not on this trip, but gave him details of my previous trip. And he said that side of the hotel is the haunted side, and that employees will never go to that side of the hotel alone at night. And then he shared with me things that have happened to their staff while on that side of the building, and to say the least, it was pretty frightening. This made me a believer in ghosts without a doubt, and since then, I've had a few things that are not explainable happen, but nothing as severe as what I experienced in New Orleans in that hotel. On my birthday in May of 2014, I went to the bar with a friend to celebrate. We were sitting on the patio when another of my friends, Steve, showed up at the bar. We were laughing and having a good time. Steve got excited and pointed to his new motorcycle parked across the street. I looked over it and it was like somebody dragged a dark black blanket over my eyes, like a dark storm rolling in over the ocean. I literally saw it. I felt like he was going to die on that machine, and it even slipped out of my mouth to him. He promised me that he would be okay, and so I dropped it. 29 days later, he was driving home on that motorcycle and his front wheel went up on the trunk of the person in front of him. He spun out, and unfortunately, he died there. It's been 10 years and I still think about this. Honestly, I wish I pushed harder about keeping him off that motorcycle, but I didn't. I lost a great friend that year, and I no longer remember his laugh, which was my favorite thing about him. On the other hand, I feel partially responsible for putting that into the universe, sort of like I killed him. I get to live with this the rest of my life, and I'm really sorry that I didn't press harder. I'm sorry that I lived longer than him, and I'm really sorry that he didn't get to see his little sister get married too. I'm sorry that I couldn't face his mother about this. When I was like 6 or 7 years old, I was sleeping in the den of my grandma's house while my parents were having a bonfire outside and drinking. It was definitely sometime after midnight, but I woke up suddenly for some reason and started looking around the room in the dark. It was then that I saw a little person dressed in all black, and he had a little hat and like a little cape on, but then I realized that it looked like a shadow, like it was completely black. He then ran across the room and into the closet, but the closet door was closed, so he ran through the door. I got so freaked out by that I screamed for my mum. She heard me and came inside. I told her what I had seen and she believed me. Apparently my grandma's house was crazy haunted. And now, I'm not sure if it was the same night or a different night, but my mum told me about this years later when I was older. My mum was telling her brother, my uncle, what I saw, and she said that I had seen a midget in all black, and my uncle cuts her off and asks, did it have a newsboy hat and a cape? She said yes, and he says, I've seen him too. He was sitting on the wall behind the avocado tree one night, and he was smoking a cigarette watching me. He said that he had seen the cigarette light up when he was taking a drag, and then he just suddenly disappeared. It was super crazy, and honestly, I don't know what to make of it all these years later. If he was able to smoke a cigarette, is that even a shadow person at all? Was it a demon? It's like it was sentient, maybe. So, what could it have been? This was like 25 years ago now, and the whole thing still troubles me. This happened to me when I was around 9 and my little sister was 3. It was night time, around 10 p.m, and I was playing computer games on my desktop that was in my room. My desk faced the wall opposite of my door in my room, and I heard something hit the wall beside me. I turned around and there was nothing there. Now, as a kid, I just figured that I was tripping and got back to playing my game. But then it happened again. I turned around again, but this time when I did, I saw my sister walking down the stairs. Mind you, the stairs were literally right next door to my room. I couldn't see down them from my room, but I could see when someone would go to walk down them. My little sister was so small at the time that our parents would give her one of her big t-shirts to wear when she went to bed sometimes. And when I saw her, I called out to her, but she didn't answer. She just walked down the stairs. Now, I know 100% that I had seen a small figure in an oversized white t-shirt walk down those stairs. So I got up and I went to the stairs, but I didn't see her. I figured that she must have run down, but it was weird because she was scared to go downstairs by herself at night. I quickly ran downstairs to see what she was doing, but all of the lights in the TV were off. The only light on was a little sculpture case that my mum put ornaments in. I checked the kitchen and living room, but she wasn't down there. I ran back upstairs to find her in our parents' bed, asleep. My mum was at work that night, and my dad was in the shower. Me and my sister and dad, we were the only 3 home. As a kid, I just shrugged it off and got back to my game, but now as a 26-year-old man, it honestly scares the heck out of me to think about it. I mean, what the heck was that I saw that night? There is a strange old energy throughout Georgia Piedmont in the foothills of the Appalachians. The geography of the area, that which has not yet been consumed by Atlanta's limitless growth, can be characterized by dense forests, rolling hills, and shallow red clay valleys punctuated by small grassy meadows. Silty rivers and small streams crisscross the landscape, often filling up the valleys to form lakes and marshes. You're never alone in these forests too, which are densely populated with wildlife of all strata. The region also hosts a large human presence, with booming sunbelt suburbs sprawling endlessly into the ancient hills. As there are so many people in a relatively small region, it can feel difficult to escape the hustle and bustle of it all. Well-known trails close to the population centers are often crowded, especially on fall weekends when the plentiful trees bloom with autumn color. I've been around long enough to know what hikes to avoid at certain times of the year, as solitude is one of the most enticing benefits of wilderness to me. Plenty of state and natural forests, as well as expensive county nature preserves, go relatively unnoticed if they're not among the top search results on all trails. My Labrador puppy loves to accompany me on any hike. and after work one day, I loaded him into the cab of my tired old pickup and drove us out to a close-by nature preserve that we frequent. The small gravel parking lot was totally empty when we arrived. The trail that we took led straight from the parking lot and was one of the most popular. It was midsummer, and I knew that there would be at least 90 minutes before sunset, but under the tree cover, the landscape was already beginning to darken. As we got on our way, the roar of cicadas immediately drowned out the soft percussion of our footsteps. After crossing a whitewater creek and proceeding through a thicket of tall pines for not more than 2 miles, the view suddenly opens up to an expansive, untamed meadow. Markings on trees along the right-hand side clearly indicate where the trail resumes on the opposite corner, several hundred yards away. The majority of the meadow slopes down gradually to the left, dotted with occasional dogwoods, and is sliced off sharply by another wall of old-growth pines before the bottom of the hill. Now, although I was familiar with the trail, I suddenly found us cutting swiftly leftward through the tall grass and down the hill toward the grove at the bottom of the meadow. Both my pup and I were drawn with urgency to this off-trail area of the preserve. Soon enough, we were at the trees and taking our first steps into the dim woods. Through the branches ahead, I could see a crumbling red brick chimney standing alone in the brush. It didn't appear to be far away, but as we continued to advance toward it for several minutes, it seemed that, for whatever reason, we just weren't getting any closer. Suddenly, a large black snake stopped us in our tracks, positioning itself as if to block us and staring with a raised head. This is highly unusual behavior for black snakes, which are normally furtive and keep away from people. This slight shock snapped me out of my almost trance-like state, and suddenly, everything felt very wrong. I took it as a sign that we were not welcome in that part of the forest, and no longer wanted to investigate the chimney. It took much longer than I expected to get back into the meadow. At this point, I was drenched in sweat, and my pup was panting hard, whereas not long ago we were enjoying the relatively cool summer evening. The meadow, too, was now dark, and when I checked my watch, I saw that we had been off the trail for nearly an hour, apparently. Also, everything was now completely silent, no more cicada chirping. None of that made sense, but I've had similar encounters throughout the region, where the laws of space and time seem to be somehow suspended in certain areas of the backwoods. I've considered looking for the chimney again when I'm sure to have more daylight, but then I think about the snake's warning and the feeling of existential dread that I felt that evening. I don't know. Perhaps some things are just not meant to be investigated. Of all the unexplainable things that I've witnessed throughout my life, I'm female and in my 30s, I only saw an apparition once, and I am sure that I saw what I think I saw. I was about 10 to 11 years old. My grandma was babysitting my younger sister and I. My sister was 5 or 6. She was watching TV in the living room. My grandma and I were at the kitchen table. Her kitchen window was located directly above her sink, and from where we were sitting, we were facing that window. There is also a sliding glass door to the right side of that window that exits out to a deck, and it was surrounded by a fenced-in yard in a densely populated suburban neighborhood. It couldn't have been any later than 2 or 3 in the afternoon. It was a nice spring day and slightly overcast. One of our favorite things to do was to have tea together, and so she made the best iced tea, and I always wanted it when I visited. We were sitting at the table, chatting and drinking said tea, when out of my peripheral vision, I noticed something appear in the window. I looked up, and clear as day, right in the window looking. I asked my grandma what she saw in the window, and she told me that it looked like a middle-aged man from the past who she did not recognize. I asked if he had a mustache, and she said yes. I asked what kind of mustache she saw, and she said that it was big and curled. Had my grandmother not been there to validate what I saw in that window that day, I would have gone the rest of my life thinking that I conjured that image up in my mind. But the fact that she saw it too, well, again, I know what I saw. So I moved in with an old roomie, Cassidy, and her 2 dogs back in August of 2021. We had an apartment for a year prior to moving to the duplex. The new place was on the south end of Columbus, not the best area, but I could deal with addicts and persistent homeless people, no problem. What I couldn't deal with, though, was whatever was actually there. Move-in was normal chaos. Boxes, sleeping on a mattress with your bed frame next to you, painting, etc. Nothing out of the ordinary happening. After a few weeks, I was constantly misplacing things, though. This is far from unheard of for me, but it was sort of out of control. Keys I put in the middle of an empty table wouldn't be there 10 minutes later. I'd start looking for them, and then eventually they'd be back where I left them. This wasn't daily or anything, but enough to mention for sure. Duplex was 2 stories, terrible creaky floors, thin walls, and I could hear my neighbor's farts. And for a bit, it sounded like somebody was walking on the 2nd floor, but nobody was home up there. In the end, I just assumed it was the neighbors and I could hear them. That assumption, though, was disproven when my neighbors were out on their shared porch and I was inside, and I heard the footsteps and thought, oh, okay, so we really do have a little ghost here. I mean, whatever, I can deal with that. The footsteps were light and always in a sort of quick patter, like a little kid who doesn't know how to skip trying to skip or whatever. I'd get a tap on my shoulder here and there as well, but all harmless stuff. Soon I started hearing my roommate ask for me or say my name when she wasn't home. I never said anything to her in fear of sounding bonkers, but fast forward to like November of 2021, roommate comes to me in the morning and asked if I had anything spooky happen in the house beyond the footsteps and such. I told her then about hearing her ask for me when she wasn't home. She paused and did one of those eyes slightly closed, okay sort of soft nods, told me that she's been having the same thing happen, but obviously me asking for her. She never wanted to say anything for the same reason, but as she was falling asleep last night, her mirror fell. One of those cheap Walmart floor mirrors. Well, it didn't fall technically because it started to tip over, paused for a second, cracked, and then fell. She got freaked out by this, but didn't know if she was just lucid dreaming or what. After she mentioned this, and we both acknowledged hearing stuff, it was then that things began to pick up a smidge. The footsteps became more frequent. I had a few taps on my back, and would occasionally catch something just in the corner of my eye, but never full on. And I mean, things like this happen, but nothing crazy happened for a bit. But late January, Cassidy is out for the night and I'm passing out in my bed. I'm in that sort of juicy spot, park comfort and cozy levels. Everything stays the same for a while, until Cassidy moved out mid-April of 2022 and obviously took her dogs with her. And then everything got wild fast. Within the first week of solo house life, I'm in my room laying in my bed. The foot of my bed faces the door, TV is to the right of it. I'm not sleeping, just sort of chilling watching TV. And from the top of the door frame is a tube, but I'm on my bed, which is on the floor, not about to take my bed frame apart and reset it up and all that, while I start packing my stuff. At this point, I'm moving or attempting to. Credit score and financial situation aren't ideal, but I've seen enough horror movies and I know staying helps nothing. After staying at my art studio a few nights and spending the days there packing with no activity, I decided to stay another night. After all, my studio is not the most comfortable place to sleep. First night back, nothing, just the overwhelming fear that it's going to happen again. Second night, nothing. Third night, same. Okay, so maybe I have carbon monoxide poisoning or something the other night. I try to breathe easy, but that stuff was terrifying, so easier said than done, right? Once I somewhat settled back in while continuing to pack up, that was when the footsteps started back up. Things progressed like a heroin addict's tolerance after a quick stint in rehab. Then I started catching little glimpses of it too, where it will be like right at my shoulder, just enough in my peripheral for me to notice that it's there. As soon as my eyes stop focusing on that area and my head turns, there it is, in that corner. A bunch of creepy stuff started happening too at this point. Here are some examples. So I was showering naked, as most people do, right? Recently removed shirt was on the floor leaning on the closed door. I rinsed my face and then my shirt is halfway under the door. My leg was grabbed my steps. My little closet door got slammed shut at one point. The house got unbearable, especially upstairs. Like the second that I go up there, it would be right on my back. Not touching me, but like just right there, right out of sight. You could feel it. Every step that I took, it took with me. This wasn't just at night anymore too. It was constant. Keep in mind too that I'm packing up to move, so I really don't have a choice but to be there sometimes. I never go at night anymore, and if I do have to go upstairs to pack, I'm supermarket sweep styling that stuff. But my final to heck with this was at the end of May. I was in my room finishing up packing. My room was hands down the worst spot in the house too. It just did not want me there at all. Its presence in there was so intense, but this time I ended up sprinting out of my house and I just never went back. Looking out of the windows from my room while closing a box, in the reflection, I see it. Sort of like when you look down a well and it's just sort of pitch black. It's like that. It's at my wall, like 7 feet tall, just looming. I turn around, but then it's gone. I'm certainly a bit uneasy, to say the least. It was like a magician coming up with new tricks to wow the audience. Just replace wow with terrify and audience with me, I suppose. But throughout this nightmare, I would often set up my phone along with the security camera. I just wanted to get something to prove that I wasn't bonkers, and this was the last time that I would have to do that. So, like I had done in the past, my trembling hand sets up my terrible iPhone 6 and hits record. I go downstairs and when I come back to check if there was anything there, I run the recording back, and although I can hear footsteps and floor creaks from myself moving around and all that, I hear "get out." And so, at that, I certainly did. I just recently remembered this story from when I was quite young, so I figured that I could share it here, as looking back it's, well, kind of creepy. So I grew up in the Midwest, a little north of Chicago. When I was probably around 12, a friend and I saw some deer behind his house. There was a large field behind it that a forest bordered, so it wasn't uncommon for deer to be there. Being kids, we wanted to go and pet the deer, so we slowly approached them. We walked across the field to them so that we wouldn't spook them. Looking back, the deer really should have ran. Two big creatures walking towards a herd of deer really should have spooked them, but they all just kind of kept on eating the grass and standing there. I was in front of my friend, so I got a closer look at the deer than he did. I would guess that I was maybe about 6 feet away from this deer when it finally looked up at me. That was when I noticed her knees and saw that they were bloodied. I just figured that it was because she had previously laid down on them or something and got scratched up. I looked up at her face and I was filled with fear. Something that was very unlike me as a kid, and so we ran. But now remembering this later, something that I didn't think about at the time as strange was the fact that her knees were actually facing the wrong way. Not like they were broken, but like they had grown to be the wrong way. Of course, she could have had a defect or something like that, but everything combined with the feeling of dread that I felt looking into her eyes, it creeps me out all these years later. If anyone has any thoughts on this, then please do share, because, I don't know, it could be nothing, but it definitely was freaky. I used to be a police officer in a city in Virginia. There is one upscale neighborhood in our city with very nice homes. I was always told stories when I was a new officer that there was a doctor who used to live in one of those homes. The story goes that the doctor attempted to perform some type of operation on himself. He numbed his stomach area to make an incision on himself, but since he couldn't feel it, he accidentally cut too far and too deep and accidentally disemboweled himself. When officers and paramedics arrived, he was found barely alive, holding his own intestines, and ultimately died. Fast forward, I was assigned a call about a young female who was found dead by her older sister. When I arrive on scene, it is in the aforementioned nice neighborhood. When I exited my vehicle, I immediately had an uneasy feeling about the house. While nice on the outside, it just had bad energy surrounding it, I suppose. As I approached the front porch, I noticed countless empty energy drink cans and a Ouija board on the front patio table. Everything about this house just felt off and wrong, but when I was let inside, the family was obviously very distraught. I was told that the deceased sister, her name was Emily, was in the basement. At this point, another officer had arrived too, and so he stayed upstairs with the family as I entered the basement. The basement was unfinished and was fairly dark, minus 2 pull-string light bulbs, one on each side of the basement. The scene in the basement was similar to the front porch though. Energy drink cans were everywhere, and another Ouija board was on a small coffee table. Emily, who was 19 if I remember correctly, was hanging by her neck on a basement rafter. She had unfortunately ended her own life with an exercise band and was swinging back and forth slightly. It was a horrible sight, and another officer helped me lift her to bring her down. Emily's family consisted of her mother and father and her older sister. Her parents stated that they had been trying to help her because all she ever did was drink energy drinks to stay up all hours of the night playing on the Ouija board. Her sister gave a little bit more detail about it. Being sisters, she stated that they were very close and told each other everything pretty much. Her older sister said that Emily indeed had been obsessed with the Ouija board, drinking energy drinks to stay up all night and talk to what she believed was her boyfriend, who was dead. Her sister stated that Emily had been saying that her boyfriend was begging for her to come join him in the afterlife, and so she believed that this is why she did what she did. Now, let me reiterate, this house felt wrong. Everything felt bad, and I had a very uneasy and sick feeling being in that basement. And not because of the dead body. After all, it definitely wasn't my first. This is a call that really messed me for a while, though, and we really never got much more explanation, and as cops, you kind of just have to move on to the next call. But 2 weeks later, to the day, I get a call about a car accident with ejection. I head to the call, code 1, lights and sirens, and arrive to find a convertible BMW with the top down, which had experienced an obvious horrible crash and rollover. I was sitting on its wheels, and in the driver's seat was a woman who clearly had a broken neck, as her head was almost all the way turned around. Next to the vehicle, about 25 feet away though, was a man who had been ejected. Keep in mind this was a convertible, so he was ejected from the top of the car, and let's just say that it was a horrible scene. I went to close off the scene with some yellow tape. I walked about 75 yards away from the accident, where I found yet another chunk of the guy. I'm not trying to be intentionally graphic here, but I want to paint the picture of just how bad and violent this car accident was. Upon obtaining the man's ID, I read the information off to the dispatch, and then another officer and I both realized the same thing at the same time. These two people, they were Emily's parents, who 2 weeks to the day just died in a horrible way. And I tell you that breaking the news to the older sister was absolutely heartbreaking. In fact, I kept in touch with her for a little while after this. She had inherited her parents' estate and all of the life insurance money, etc. She ended up selling off everything and buying a different house to try and start over and repair her broken life. However, it doesn't end here because around a month later, another officer was called after a pedestrian was struck by a car while she was jogging in her neighborhood. And yes, you guessed it, it was the sister. She managed to survive several weeks in a coma, but ultimately, she just didn't make it. If you're wondering why this story about the doctor is relevant, it's because the house that Emily killed herself in was the same house that the doctor lived in. I don't know what you guys think, but to me it definitely seems like either that house is cursed or Emily opened up something really bad. That was all a few years ago now, and I'm no longer a police officer. I moved a couple of states away, and twice now I've found 2 different Ouija board planchettes on the sidewalk when going to check my mail. I never touch them, obviously, and usually use a stick or something to push them into the storm drain, but coincidence? I'm not so sure. I grew up in a fairly rural area of Virginia. As a kid, I had an obsession for dirt bikes, watching motocross on TV, the X Games, reading Racer X magazines. It was all I thought about. So when my mum and dad bought me my first dirt bike one Christmas, I was ecstatic. From that moment too, my days were consumed with riding that thing. As soon as I got home from school until sundown pretty much, you could bet that I was in those woods somewhere riding around. Right behind my parents' house was a huge expanse of woods. There was a trail that ran virtually the entire length of our neighborhood. It was a point-to-point trail with a few turns, hills, and jumps. It would take about 15 minutes on my dirt bike to ride the length of the trail from end to end. There were no other trails too, just this one long trail. And when I got to the end, I would just turn around and go back the other way. I would ride back and forth for hours pretty much every day. I ended up learning that trail like the back of my hand, where every tree root was, where every turn was, where every rut was. I mean, you get the picture. Now, when I was 13, I started having this reoccurring dream. I would be riding my dirt bike along that familiar trail when suddenly there would be a new intersection, a brand new trail to go down. I would ride down it and come to a large clearing in the woods. In my dream, I had this feeling that when I got to the clearing, I was supposed to be looking for something, finding something there. But every time I got to the clearing, I would always wake up. This reoccurring dream continued as well until I was about 14. I left my house one afternoon, hopped on my dirt bike like normal, and began another afternoon of riding back and forth on the trail. I rode for around an hour when it happened. I was heading up a small hill mindlessly by this point, knowing everything to expect. Coming over the hill, though, I saw it. There, all of a sudden, was the intersection. I locked my rear brakes, causing the rear end to slide sideways slightly. I couldn't believe my eyes. Was this real? I sat there for several minutes, my bike's motor idling, staring down the trail. 1,000 thoughts suddenly raced through my head. I mean, how was this possible? Was it always here? Looking down the trail, I couldn't see the end of it. It went straight for about 50 yards, but I couldn't make out what was at the end. It was as if I couldn't focus on it clear enough. It was just sort of a straight trail, though, I guess. It matched exactly what was in my dream, though. And so, in the end, I decided not to go down it, almost not believing that it was really there. I told myself that if it was there again tomorrow, then I would go down it. Anyway, the next day came and I again ventured out into the woods. I rode straight to the spot where I saw the new trail, fully expecting for it to be gone, but sure enough, there it was again. I made the turn at the intersection, and that's when I slowly began riding down the trail. I drove down the trail, staying in third gear, slow and steady. The trail was completely straight, and it only took me about a minute to reach it. The clearing, that is. the exact clearing that I always saw in my dreams. Dumbfounded, I sort of stopped, put my kickstand down, turned off the motor and got off my bike. I took off my helmet, looking around. What the heck, I whispered to myself. The clearing itself was a perfect circle, around 50 feet in diameter. It was surrounded by dense forest, minus the single trail leading to it, obviously. I couldn't make sense of this, though. I thought that I was losing my mind or something. I walked around the circle confused, contemplating what it all meant, and looking around for answers. I began to feel an eerie feeling, though, all of a sudden, as if I was being watched. A feeling of dread and danger suddenly crept up the back of my neck. I felt as if I was suddenly somewhere that I was very much not supposed to be. Man, to heck with this, I said. I threw my helmet back on, not bothering to buckle it, and I kick-started my dirt bike, bringing life back to the motor. I peeled back down the trail, shifting gears, and I hauled Bart back home. I rode for a few minutes when it suddenly hit me, though. Why the heck is it taking so long to get back? I mean, it took less than a minute to reach the clearing, yet I've been riding down this trail for what felt like was several minutes, and I hadn't met back up with my familiar trail yet. At that, I started to panic, getting disoriented. I told myself, maybe I'm just going the wrong way. I knew that it didn't make sense, but I was willing to try anything to get out of there at that moment. I spun the bike back around, and within about 10 seconds, I made it back to the clearing all of a sudden. I peeled around again, back down the trail. Again I rode and rode, never making it back to the intersection though. I stopped, got off my bike, feeling defeated, confused, and a little bit scared now. I threw my helmet and collapsed next to a tree, sobbing. On my knees, I let out a frustrated and terrified scream, I guess. I sat there trying to think of what to do next. I'm not sure how long I sat there for, but it felt like hours. I could see the sun dropping in the sky, the woods getting dimmer. I started to feel like I was never going home. So I closed my eyes and somehow, probably out of mental exhaustion, I must have fallen asleep with my back against a tree. I'm really not sure how long I slept for, but I woke up, immediately jumped to my feet, wildly looking around and quickly gathering my bearings. And it was then that I realized that the sun was shining brightly and I was now back on the trail, my blessed familiar trail. The intersection and the new trail were still there, but somehow I was out. Quickly, I jumped onto my bike, riding as fast as I could to get home. I had no idea how long I was gone for and thought that my parents were probably worried sick. Exiting the woods by my house, I parked my bike and I quickly ran inside. "Hi, honey," my mum said. "I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. I just lost track of time." I managed to get out. "Well, it's only been an hour. I'm surprised you're already back inside, actually," my mum said. I stood there, mouth agape, staring at my mum. "Are you okay, sweetie?" my mother asked me, and a look of concern was suddenly growing on her face. I forced out an awkward smile. Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just not feeling well, I think." I went to my room and a million questions were running through my mind. I spent the next few days confused, replaying every moment through my head. I wanted to just make sense of, well, everything, to have some logical reason for it all, but there just wasn't any. In the end, I devised a plan, though, that, looking back, was honestly incredibly stupid, but I couldn't live with not knowing what the heck happened to me in those woods that day. Now, my dad was a bit of a tool connoisseur. Any tool, hardware, rope, bungee cords, I mean, he was your guy. And among his collection, he had a giant spool of yellow rope, around 600 feet of it. I decided that I was going to use that rope, tie it to a tree at the intersection, and then ride back down the trail to investigate. The rope, it would serve as my lifeline, helping guide me back when I was ready to leave. And that day, I went back out. Getting to the trail intersection, I tied one end of the rope around my waist and used several bungee cords to tie the spool to a tree, giving me slack but staying secured to the tree. And afterward, I headed back down the trail. Feeling a new boost of confidence and determination, I rode back down that trail and quickly arrived back to the clearing. I kept one hand on the knot on my waist, being sure that it stayed there. I got off my bike, leaving it idling, and walked into the middle of the circle. I started to get that eerie feeling again, as if I was being watched. But this time I shook it off. A new feeling of bravery had suddenly come over me. I felt determined to discover what it was that we were supposed to find here, and what the point of all this was. I forced down the feeling of dread. Scanning the clearing, I suddenly became fixated on one tree in particular. This tree was darker than the rest, almost looking burned maybe. I got closer to it. Flaky, black, scorched marks covered the tree. I was staring at the tree, almost feeling stuck in place, when suddenly something began slowly peeking its head out from behind it. The face was black, burned, decayed, and not human, almost like a bad imitation of one. It had short, wiry black hair that looked oily and covered in soot. And as soon as its eyes met mine, my dirt bike's motor shut off all of a sudden. The silence caused me to turn around to look at my bike, then I quickly turned back. But when I did, the thing was gone. Eerily, though, the woods suddenly became very silent. For a split second, I froze too, until instinct in my body kicked in and told me to get the heck out of there quickly. I sprinted back to my bike, kick-started it harder than I ever had. I half expected it to not start, but to my relief, it had started. I left my helmet behind, riding as fast as I could. The image of the thing's eyes burned into my mind. In my haste to leave, I made a fatal mistake though. Having walked a good ways past my bike into the clearing, I had created way too much slack in the rope when heading back the opposite direction. I was shifting gears, going faster and faster, when suddenly the rope caught my chain. My rear wheel locked and I was sent straight over the handlebars. Although in pain, I got to my feet as quickly as I could, dirty, limping, a burning pain in my ribs. The rope was still tied around my waist, but it had somehow been severed in the crash. Frantically, I looked around for the rest of the rope, the end that would lead me back, but it was just gone. I ran to my bike in any case and trying desperately to get the pieces of the rope out of my chain and sprocket, when I saw it. Movement from the corner of my eye. I stopped, froze, looking in the direction of the movement. I then saw more movement again out of the corner of my eye. It was as if it was, I don't know, anticipating my moves, staying just out of eyesight, darting between the trees almost. I took off running down the trail, abandoned my bike. My adrenaline was pumping and I knew that I was running for my life. I then spotted the yellow rope, that beautiful yellow rope. I literally screamed yes, running as quickly as I could toward it, following it to salvation. But the rope, it began retracting, dragging on the ground, back up the trail. No, I screamed, running as fast as I could toward it. I ran after it as it seemed to run away from me. I was hoping to see the intersection, praying that it would be there. And then, all of a sudden, I did. I reached the intersection, crying, heaving, trying and failing to catch my breath. For a second, I felt pure relief for making it out alive, but that was when I noticed something. The yellow rope. The spool was no longer bungeed to the tree. The rope now led behind the tree. Slowly, it stepped out from behind the tree, revealing itself in its entirety. It was the thing from the clearing. The woods suddenly fell silent again. A feeling of pure dread came over me. It had a look of pure malice in its gaze, and a terrible smile as it continued to gather up the rest of the yellow rope. I was frozen in fear. I felt as if I was in ice water. I couldn't catch my breath, couldn't scream. I just stood there frozen. I can only describe what I saw as a distorted imitation of a human. Black, charred, its form twisted and contorted into a grotesque mockery of life. Its eyes were pools of endless darkness, devoid of empathy or humanity, gleaming with an ancient predatory intelligence. It then began to move toward me, slowly. Weirdly though, its steps were completely silent, and the air around me suddenly grew cold and carried a stench of like decay or something. With each movement, its body sort of shifted and rippled too, as if it was sort of struggling to contain its own shape. Its presence filled me with an overwhelming dread, a primal fear that seized my entire being. Its voice was terrible too, a twisted mixture of a whisper and a scream almost. I felt as if its gaze seeped into my mind, into my very being, turning my thoughts into twisted and nightmarish desires. And as it approached closer and stood over me, I honestly thought that I was about to die. And then suddenly, everything just went black. I woke up back on my familiar trail, the intersection now gone, the rope now gone, no trace of anything was left. I was in shock and in pain, and I walked back home. In the end, I told my parents that I had crashed my dirt bike and wasn't strong enough to push it back home. Look for it, but he never could find it. Honestly, I didn't care. I was never going to touch another dirt bike for the rest of my life as far as I was concerned. Since then, though, everything has felt different. I feel like something is missing in me, as if that thing took something from me. I know that that's weird, but I felt unable to enjoy anything, unable to have relationships, unable to care. I struggle to sleep. I don't even really feel tired. I just couldn't really feel anything anymore. I didn't know what to do. I just felt like a shell. That Christmas, though, my family and I were getting ready to leave for a Christmas tree farm, an annual tradition that used to bring me excitement. My parents were trying their best, and they saw the change in me. Everyone did. Putting on brave faces, my parents asked me if I was excited to pick out a tree. I wasn't excited, not at all. I couldn't be excited about anything anymore. Sure, I said, trying my best to sound convincing. Before we left, though, my dad was digging in the garage looking for something. Hey, Bud, have you seen my yellow rope? The question sent me into a flashback of full terror, leaving me screaming, sobbing, and begging for help, begging for it to stop. From then on, I spent years in and out of therapy and even institutions. I am an adult now, but I've just never shaken the feeling of pure emptiness. I decided that I'm going to go back to my childhood home, back to that familiar trail that I can still remember like the back of my hand. If the intersection is there, then I'm going to go back down it. In fact, I've decided that I'm going to try to kill that thing and get back the piece of myself that it clearly took. And well, if it kills me, taking the rest of me, well, so be it. Either way, I don't want to live like this anymore, and I'm going to be free of this. I grew up in a century house. I think it was 105 years old in 1985, so very, very old. It was beautiful, but I hated the vibes there. Always felt nasty and sort of unclean. Between the ages of 3 and 8, though, I would see a fuzzy, misty sort of apparition that would play peekaboo with me in the mornings as I lay in bed. At first, it would be misty and become intermittently more solid, waxing and waning in its visibility like power surges. For a long time, I would stare, especially on weekends when I slept in and had time to ponder, thinking that I was half asleep, but I would count, spell words, do my ABCs, later recite prime numbers, pinch myself, move about to make sure that I was awake, and I can assure you that I always was. I'm a pretty straightforward person, always have been, but I couldn't believe my eyes. But then I got used to it, and it would just keep playing peekaboo as I read my books and magazines, when I got some cereal, sometimes take a bath and came back and read. Later, when I got a TV, I would watch cartoons and it would be there. It sort of became my morning ghost buddy, I guess. I did my thing and it did its thing. It was a misty shape of a head and shoulder and featureless but semi-solid. I could see through it, but also it was like staticky and would sometimes be more obvious and then sort of fade back to a less solid fog. Also, it sort of looked like moving particles if you stared long enough, like static from a TV, but more white. It didn't feel scary, I guess, but just odd to me. It was almost like I was witnessing something highly unusual, and it was sort of bemusing. A phenomena of sorts, I guess. Anyway, the freakiest part is that it was doing the little peek thing at the top corner of the 10-foot door frame. Sometimes a little more than the head and shoulders would move out, and it would be an amorphous blob, but it's like there was a barrier and it couldn't move far beyond the door frame. I don't even know if it was actually truly conscious enough to be playing with me, or it was sort of stuck there at the frame and doing its thing, but I sort of felt like it had some intention. Just a feeling I had, but that's what it was. Eventually it would stop, or the light got so bright that it would not be discernible, but I think it stopped about mid-morning. I never saw it at night or dusk or any time during the day if I took a nap. This was only in the morning hours, between dawn and say 10 or 11 a.m. Eventually I just stopped seeing it too. It could be because I started closing my bedroom door at night as I got older and wanted privacy, but I'm not so sure. Looking at the history of the house that was built by a distant relative who owned a sawmill and local hotel, he was a bad actor from what I understand. At some point there was a fire shortly after the house was first erected in the 1880s, and the stairwell and the upper floor were damaged and reconstructed. Not a devastating fire that killed anyone, but the stairwell in the foyer on the second floor by my bedroom was not the original, but 20 years or so younger. Maybe that guy, though, maybe he killed somebody there because he was a southern gangster of sorts and was involved in getting rid of some folks, or so it's said. Some people did pass away at the house of old age and natural causes. Wakes were held there, so maybe a ghost. Appalachia is old with history, predating the settlers, so who knows. To my knowledge, no dramatic deaths, and my family are all about knowing the scoop on the family drama, so we could never find anything there. Also, the house eventually burned down due to electrical issues during renovations after we sold it in the 90s. But it had a majorly creepy vibe in some of the rooms also, like a feeling of dread and sort of sadness, I think. I had a playroom in the attic, and sometimes I would be playing in there and feel like I was being watched, and the hair on my arms would actually stand up like fear or static in the air, and my ears would start to ring too. I describe it a bit like the air changed, like when you go to higher altitudes and your ears pop, or when the silence becomes audible. A shift in silence from normal silence to sort of complete and thick silence. It was a total atmospheric shift, a pressure change. I would be so afraid that I would almost get a freeze response, but I somehow knew not to react like that. Like I was scared, but to put my things away per usual and calmly leave like normal without freaking out or getting hurried. As I got older, I have heard some bad energies feed on fear, so it's interesting as a kid that I knew in my gut not to react like that. Just sort of remove myself, but don't overreact. I've always had a good poker face, and maybe that's why, I don't know, but I also don't scare easily, even in situations that would warrant panic. I'll freak out later, but in the moment I just try to stay cool, like autopilot or going numb, which is good in times when you need your wits. That's the first time that I remember engaging in that mode, about 5 or 6 years old in my attic playroom. Another story too is that we lived in a mountainous area foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. At the base of the mountain there was a huge cotton field. It was pretty beautiful actually, but I would freak out when I saw it. My mum said that it started as a toddler, but I would look at the field as we drove by and I would start hyperventilating, whimpering and get tearful. Later, when I got older, around 5, and learned what was up, I would just hide under a blanket until we passed it to manage my exposure. As I got even older, I would just look at it and try to figure out what about it vexed me. It was a stunning visage, beautiful and picturesque. Nothing that I know of happened there, like a battle or recent bad history or anything. But my mind saw something my eye could not, and it was freaky, and for whatever reason I hated it. As an adult, I no longer get that feeling at all when I see the field. Just a peaceful place, I guess. People even take pictures in the late summer and fall when the cotton blooms there. Also, there's sunflower fields adjacent to it, and that's pretty glorious. It's a sunny patch in the middle of the mountains. A valley with meadows, and coming off of the mountain you get a bird's eye view, and it's honestly like no other. But as a kid, for whatever reason, I wanted to walk a wide circle around it, and I mean a very wide circle. My grandfather's family had lived in the mountains of very rural central Pennsylvania since the 1700s. In the 1890s, my great-great-grandfather built an expansion onto a house or loft that his father, born in 1829, had built. The house still stands today, and we still go there most weekends in the summer as it's 8 miles from a very large and beautiful lake. I've been going there since I was a kid, and we call it the Old House. The house is filled with very old photos. Some of the photos we know the ancestors in them, some we actually don't. Some of the photos, though, are very creepy. When I was a child, probably about, 9 or 10 years old, we went for a weekend in the summer. I had one pair of sandals that I was wearing, and I would always take them off next to the fireplace, which didn't work anymore. On the morning that we had to leave to go back home, the sandals that I was wearing were now gone. They weren't next to the fireplace anymore. Both my parents and my grandfather who was there searched the entire house high and low for my sandals, but they could never find them. Keep in mind that this house is not very large. They searched for hours too before they finally gave up, and I made the 2-hour ride back home without my shoes. My grandfather stayed at the house for another day before going back home. When my grandfather woke up the next day, the sandals, they were right there next to the fireplace where I had left them. But my family still talks about this to this day. My grandfather told my mum that they must have not wanted her to leave. I've always loved this house and have felt very close to my ancestors while in it, but that was pretty creepy. Anyway, I went to the house last summer with my daughter and my friend. I set a vape pen down on the kitchen table. My daughter and friend were outside picking apples off of an apple tree behind the house. We were due to leave the house that morning. I went outside to load up my car, and when I came back in, the vape pen was not on the kitchen table. Nobody else had been in the house between the time that I had set the pen on the table and the time that I had come back in. We searched the entire house, and there was just no vape pen to be found. I and my family members have been back at that house half a dozen times since last fall when this happened, and no vape pen was ever found or recovered. My ancestors never drank or smoked from what my grandfather tells us. My mum tells me all the time that it was them telling you to stop. Not super scary or anything, but it is definitely completely unexplainable. I have always felt a crazy deep connection to that house too, and have taken it upon myself to research and gather a lot of information about my ancestors who lived on that land. I am the oldest grandchild, and one day that house will become mine, as we always pass it down to the oldest member of the family, per my great-great-grandfather's will. Weirdly enough too, I seem to be the only person whose belongings always go missing in that house. So I live in Pennsylvania, just outside of Philly, and the following happened a few years ago. It was a late November evening, and my wife and I were craving wings that day. A quick search brought up a new joint in Royersford, PA, that had just opened. I put in an online order, and then I zip on by. The man behind the counter, middle-aged African-American gentleman with a jovial disposition and a hearty laugh. We talked about the Eagles while he got my food ready. Eventually, I thanked him and I left. A few months later, he is in the news, apparently, for killing his business partner, apparently over a money dispute. She had funds and he wanted them for a new location, but she allegedly refused. He buried her outside of an industrial area and parked her car elsewhere. The police found evidence of him being in her car, several failed attempts to get access to her Cash App or Venmo account, evidence of a struggle in her home, and before long, Chicken Wing Guy was actually arrested, tried, and convicted of his business partner's murder. I didn't connect it immediately to until later that this was the same guy who had served me after an article named the business that he owned. It was the very restaurant that I got wings at a few months prior. The wings, they weren't good at all as I recall too, but he was a convicted murderer and I was served by him. My grandma's property is settled all the way in the back of the woods at the end of a long unpaved road. Along with being comically bumpy, it also has a history of hauntings that were passed between family members over the years. I myself was somewhat skeptical of these tales, not because I'm not a believer of the paranormal, but because my uncle and father have a habit of being very exaggerative. Until one night, about a year ago. Back then, I lived with my grandma down at the end of that road, and at the time, I also didn't own a car.